Hello, everyone. Welcome to RotoWire TV. Today is Wednesday, January 8th, and today we are talking about daily fantasy basketball. I am here with our Wrath of fantasy sports, so daily fantasy sports. Michael Rathburn is with me here at Fantasy Wrath. And today, like I said, we're talking about fantasy basketball, and both of us have actually chosen lineups for today. We started earlier with our introductory segment as far as the strategies. Now we're actually going to put them to work in fantasy basketball. And we actually went through a couple of different strategies. Like I said before, all of our content is free at rotowire.com/daily, where there's articles about this very subject, about picking your lineups for today even. And so let's get right to it. First of all, I want to talk about just the format of this league. It's a $60,000 cap with 2 point guards, 2 shooting guards, 2 small forwards, 2 power forwards, and a center. And that actually averages out to $6,666 per player. We've discussed this in the introductory segment, but let's go into it again. Depending on the format, what kind of bankroll management do you do for this kind of game?
Okay, yeah. As far as roster management and things like that, let's say for example, you and I are playing a heads-up contest. We'll probably run this lineup in a head-to-head contest. So we're probably looking at a target score here on FanDuel of about 275, and not looking to take too many extreme risks, as we talked about in the earlier video. Definitely want to have a couple of studs in there. Want to lean more towards those mid-tier players, get more value in terms of the more consistency, and then have like 1 or 2 low-end guys. Whereas if we're playing tournament, we're probably looking at 3 or 4 value plays, a couple of real high-end guys, and then a couple of mid-tier guys.
All right, let's get right into our lineups here. I'm actually going to pull up our lineups on my screen. You're going to see my face disappear. Sorry, everyone. I know it's very, very attractive. But no, here we go now. Here are our 2 lineups side by side. So my lineup is on the left, and yours is on the right. And so we see that we actually have some similarities, but there are also lots and lots of differences. So let's get started at point guard because I took one of my stars at point guard, and you previously said that you actually weren't going to touch this guy tonight, and that's Steph Curry. So go take it away with Steph Curry.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the argument for wanting to take Steph Curry. Deron Williams is out. So you're looking at Sean Livingston, who really can't guard anybody. He doesn't have any cartilage left in his legs. So, I can understand why you would want to go with Curry. The reason I'm fading Curry tonight is he hasn't really been playing well the last few games. I'm not sure if he's battling through an injury or not. And, so he's really struggling, and they're on the road. And I think in this particular spot, if I'm going to have to pay 10K, I like some other players tonight, and I'm not willing to spend that kind of money on Curry. So I'm actually going with Damian Lillard. I know they played last night. He had a monster game last night, and they play well at home, and Jameer really can't cover anybody, the point guard from Orlando. So I'm going to ride Lillard, and it's a great spot because the salary was already set on Lillard, so you're getting him at $7,900. I can imagine his salary is going to jump after the last game. You're probably looking at $8,500, $8,700 salary jump on Lillard, and so I'm going to take advantage of that value.
Yeah, and so with Orlando especially, I mean, the only kind of defensive presence they have in their backcourt would be Victor Oladipo, who doesn't start. Would that be someone, if he actually splits even time, is that someone you'd be worried about as a defensive matchup for Lillard?
Not really. I mean, I think the only concern I have with Lillard is that if this game gets out of hand, do they bench him? And so, that would be the only concern I have with that. But Oladipo is still a pretty young player, and so, I just love Portland at home. The only thing I would be a little bit worried about here is that the game gets out of hand. But you're getting Lillard at such a great value at $7,900 that you could argue he should be maybe $1,000 more than that based on what he's been doing.
Gotcha. And so I actually took the screen share off for a second because the next guy we actually shared. So the next guy we shared was Jeremy Lin, and that's Houston. We've written about it on the daily page at rotowire.com/daily. Houston is a team that you actually want to make sure that you grab at least one person because they play the Lakers at home. Lots of revenge factor here for Dwight Howard as well, who you have, but we'll get to him later. But why do you have Jeremy Lin as such a high value guy today?
Man, the whole world's probably have Jeremy Lin, so I certainly don't want to come out with anything that no one doesn't realize here, but you almost have to play Jeremy Lin tonight. The price tag is so cheap at 5,400. When you talk about FanDuel, I wrote about what you need to do to win, and we talk about whether it's we say 5x or 6x, and what that means is Jeremy Lin is 5,400. So in order for you to get return on value on Jeremy Lin, you need to get around 27 to 30 fantasy points tonight. He can easily do that. They're at home. It's the highest total of the night, and it does look like it's a blowout, and the Lakers can't play any D. They've got all sorts of injuries, and Kendall Marshall is already starting to look like he's running out of gas, and so they're just really limited. So I think everything lines up here for Jeremy Lin to have a big night. It wouldn't shock me if Jeremy Lin is like 35-40 tonight, which puts him at a 7, what we call a 7 or an 8x player, which is huge, especially in tournaments. You're going to get huge upside value on Lin tonight.
Perfect. That's kind of the same way I was thinking as well. Houston is one of those teams where you have to get at least one or two guys going tonight because that game looks like it's going to be a blowout. But on that, well, we're going to move on to the shooting guards now. We actually share another guy together, Terrence Ross. This is a game that very few people will actually be watching the whole entire game of, but it's Detroit at Toronto. Ross representing the Raptors. Why do you see him do you see him as one of those 5x, 6x guys from going tonight, or
well, here's the thing: is when it comes to shooting guard, especially on FanDuel, because you're required. There's a couple of things that talked about in the article on how to win on FanDuel that you have to really realize going in is they have fixed positions. What that means is they have 2 point guards, two slots, and then they have the one center. You have to pick 2 shooting guards. Also, they don't have multiple position eligibility, so they don't have guys like Curry at point guard, shooting guard. So your roster flexibility is limited on FanDuel, which means value plays are that much more increasingly, important. And Ross is only 4,300, and ever since they traded off Rudy Gay, a lot of these Raptors have seen an increase in offensive production. Ross is a guy that will consistently get 20 to 25 fantasy points. And if that's the case, I'm getting my 5 or 6x that I need. So at 4,300 as shooting guard, I really like the play, even though the game is probably going to be extremely low scoring and very boring.
Yeah, and then I think from there on, we actually have a lot of Oppo, so I'm going to put the screenshot back up here for everyone to take a look. So now, yeah, from here on out, I believe that we're different here. I actually went young here with Brad Beal on Washington as my other shooting guard, and you went with Lance Stevenson. Is this more, 6 for one, half a dozen for another, or is it just there's real value that I'm missing here with Stevenson?
Well, I mean, the salaries are the same. They're both 6,200. From that perspective, I just like the fact that Stevenson is a multi-category player. He does get a lot of double-doubles. He can even get triple-doubles. And multiple category players are extremely valuable on FanDuel because they don't take into consideration field goal or free throw percentage. So the category weights are much more in play. And Stevenson can be a guy like that. And I think even at 6,200, there's some value here. Again, we talk about, can he hit 5x, which is solid. I think can he get 30 fantasy points? Absolutely. I think in this spot, Atlanta's a little bit banged up at this point with Horford being out. That team is adjusting and struggling at this point. So I really like Stevenson. Even on the road, I still like him in this spot to at least get a nice floor play in this spot.
Yeah, and the reason why I took Beal, I'm going to be shameless here. I did go to the RotoWire.com daily fantasy page, and I looked at the article for today's fantasy basketball lineups, and Bradley Beal is facing off against New Orleans. New Orleans allows opposing guards to shoot 40% from the corner, and Bradley Beal is a guy who likes to shoot. So, like you said, it might just be one category, but he might be able to do very well at it and also get some threes in the meantime. So, double up on those points there. So, with that in mind, do you value the three-point shooters at all because it's a multiple category, or is it more just you're looking for steals and for an assist and all the other counting stats?
Right. Well, FanDuel doesn't give bonuses for threes. They do, obviously 3 points does count for 3 points, but other sites like DraftKings do give an extra half point for threes. So I don't really look at 3 points a lot, especially because you do have to take 2 shooting guards. So I tend to look for one of the strategies I talk about is look for point guards that are actually shooting guard eligible. So a guy like Jordan Crawford at some point has been a really nice play. But I think in general for FanDuel, if I can find point guards that are shooting guard eligible, I'm going to try to plug them in. That would be the first tip that I would give on how to play on FanDuel.
Gotcha. And was there another shooting guard that you were debating between, and then just decided to pick to go with Stevenson?
No, I think I've been locked in on Ross and Stevenson as far as who I really don't want to spend a ton of money on shooting guard. I want to load up in other areas, but we can take a look at some other guys that might be some shooting guard eligible. I mean, look, obviously if you want to take James Harden tonight and spend money in that spot, I can't argue with that. He could go off, and he's pretty cheap. He's only 8,600. He's been 10,000 at some points, so you could really envision Harden. He only has to get about 43 fantasy points tonight to really give you value, and that could easily happen. He could go for 50 or 60. So Harden would be the other guy I would look at in terms of really upside play.
Yeah, and then just to reiterate, shooting guards is where you look for the value because the position is so deep. It's kind of like wide receiver in football, where there's a lot of value to be had in that position. Which positions are you looking at as far as tonight where you need to spend the money because there's just not enough value there to necessitate some of the lower end guys?
Well, I think there's not a huge amount of injuries going tonight, so that's sort of why the lineup that I came up with, the highest priced player is Anthony Davis at 8,700. I'm not looking to break the bank on a Kevin Love or a Stephen Curry or Blake or anybody like that. I'm looking at more of a balanced team. There's not a huge amount of guys out there at the lower tier, so I'm looking more at that mid-tier lineup. But some of the guys that you can take a look at at the other positions, look at Glenn Davis, Big Baby. Vukovic is out with a concussion, so he would be an opportunity play that we'll talk about as well.
Yeah, and someone who I was looking at, but he just came back with an MRI. Chris Paul, that's another guy. He's eligible to go tonight, but don't start him. I almost made that mistake. So just make sure that you check up on the injuries before you go tonight. But so we'll move on to our shooting guards here. We're very different here. You went with the more, I think, two higher price guys than my guys, but I went with Harrison Barnes and Kawhi Leonard, and you went with Josh Smith and Paul Pierce. I think the theme of it is that I went with a little more younger guys who have maybe have some higher potential, except for Kawhi Leonard. But it looks like you went with the more established, more veteran presences here. So Josh Smith and Paul Pierce, as far as value here at 5,600 and 7,200, Josh Smith being the more expensive at 7,200, are those value guys, or are they more just upside, especially in the case of Paul Pierce?
Well, the reason, I'm going to go Paul Pierce because with Duran being out, I'm getting Pierce at only 5,600, which is extremely cheap. I think Pierce's floor tonight is 30, which makes him about a 5.5, close to a 6x player. So I think at that, they're at home. Golden State might be a little bit weary. They've been on, from what I gather, they've been on a pretty long road trip. Yep. And so I think, I like Pierce in this spot, especially with the injury situation with Duran. Josh Smith is only 7,200. Again, I keep saying the word only, but Josh Smith probably should be an $8,500 player at this point. It is Toronto. I know it's a slow pace, but Josh Smith has been putting up 30, 40 fantasy, 35 to 40, which makes him a 5 to 6x player, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for guys that are delivering that value and then also being consistent. And again, I'm not spending $10K tonight. I'm not spending $9K on any of these players, so I'm loading up on guys in between that $7,000 to $8,500 range.
Gotcha. Yeah, and for me, this is another position because I chose a different strategy. I went with a couple of real big stars, so I actually couldn't do the whole balancing out. So this is another position where I have to take a hit here. So I went with talent more than I went with established fantasy presence. But especially in the case of Kawhi Leonard, guys like Manu Ginobili, because they're on a second half of a back-to-back, he may not play. So Popovich has a tendency of resting the older guys. So Kawhi Leonard is one of the younger guys who actually may get more distribution and more opportunity out of that. So at 5,400, I feel like the price is right with the upside there. Even though he's not a high upside talent, he may have high upside opportunity for tonight.
Yeah,
But
it could be an optimal matchup, especially if Sean Marion's out.
yeah,
The offense could go a little bit more to Leonard, especially, and you mentioned with Ginobili possibly too. So I think Leonard is more of a floor play for me. He's a guy that can probably get you 25 based on the matchup tonight, which puts him at about 5x. But there's not a lot of ceiling there, so he is more of a head-to-head or a 50-50 type play.
yeah, and it's just and just like we said before, this is all about where you need what kind of game you're playing in. Where you see my lineup, and I have two studs. In your lineup, you have more evenly distributed. So if we were going head to head here, I would actually give the advantage to Wrath, just simply because one, he's better than me, and then secondly, his lineup. There's not a lot of chances for him to take low points here because he has a lot of established guys. But if my guys hit, I can go for a pretty big night, which is what you'd want to do for like a free roll or a large tournament. But with that in mind, I'm going to get to my second stud that I have for tonight, which is Kevin Love of Minnesota. Minnesota going off against Phoenix. So I actually decided to go with Kevin Love because he gets a lot of different categories, and he actually averages a ton of points, which is huge in this kind of format because you need those multiple format guys. The human double guys, it's so clutch in fantasy sports to get a double because you're getting a lot of points in that way. So that's the reason why I went with Kevin Love. And then for your power forwards here, you have Terrence Jones, who I actually also have, but you also went with Anthony Davis, your highest price guy. So we both actually spent a lot of money here at power forward. So why Anthony Davis instead of a guy like Kevin Love, other than that he's cheaper?
Yeah, well, you're looking at about a $2,600 difference in between Love and Davis. And early on, before Davis got hurt at the beginning of the season, their salaries were very close in value across the industry. So I look at Davis and I say, you get a team in Washington that's not very good on the interior. They're at home. Anthony Davis, to me, is probably a $10,000 player. It's just that his salary hasn't caught up to his production yet. So I'm going to get more value out of a guy like that. And he has the ability to go for 40 or 50, no problem. And, Davis's floor is probably 35, and that still puts him at around a 4x player. So, again, we talked about a heads-up play and being conservative. I think the ceiling for Davis is probably 50. The floor is 35. He's about as safe as play on the board as you could go.
Yeah. I agree. I just went for the big upside there in Kevin Love. And then with Terrence Jones, we both took him. Another Houston guy like we talked about before with Jeremy Lin. Why Terrence Jones? Why is Terrence Jones such a good value at 5,900?
Right. Well, Terrence Jones has been getting minutes, especially with ASIC being out, so he's been producing. And so when he first got in, he was extremely cheap. He was a $3,500 player, and everybody would play him. Now, what happens, though, is a player's production would typically stay the same, but his salary starts creeping up. So that's what you have to consider. Does this player still have value? Well, Chandler Parsons is probably not going to play tonight. So combining the fact that Houston is at home, they're a heavy favorite, and they're not going to rest a guy like Jones. They would probably rest a guy like Howard or Harden most likely because of the injury factor. But, Jones has potential of probably going as a ceiling play, 35, 40 fantasy points tonight, which puts him at 6x or 7x. So I think that he's got huge upside. It's a huge total game. I think the total is around 212. We talk about totals. We're talking about what Vegas puts out as a projected total line, what they think the score of this game is going to be. It's one of the highest of the night, and Houston's at home. They play a very fast pace, so I think Jones has the ability to put up 35, 40 fantasy points.
Yeah, and along that same line, you doubled up on the front court of Houston there, and you picked Dwight Howard as your center. Same type of deal. We mentioned this earlier before. Houston is the team to have tonight if you're going to go with it, load up on a team. Very high-scoring game, and it might be a blowout for Houston's favor. That might be the only thing that keeps these guys out all four quarters. But Dwight Howard has some special motivation in this one. Did you take that into account, or is this more just, the Lakers' front court's pretty bad? And Dwight Howard can take advantage of that.
Yeah, pretty much. The way that I build a lineup is I try to identify the must-have guys. I don't necessarily look at salary right away. I just look at, from a matchup perspective, who are the must-have guys for the night. Look at 2 or 3 guys. And Howard jumps off the board. He talked about the revenge factor. I don't think a lot of people are even mentioning that, but I think that's huge. Let's face it, he laid an egg in L.A. He went to Houston. He's got a lot of detractors. And it's a beat-up team. Robert Sacker, however you pronounce his name, is in the middle. I think Howard's going to want to go off tonight. I mean, you
Yeah.
might be looking at 20 boards, 25 points. It wouldn't shock me if they probably bench Harden if the game gets out of hand, because that's the guy that's been having the injury issues. But just the matchup alone, everything kind of adds up. And again, I think you're getting Howard at a cheap price because he hasn't really been putting up the numbers over the last 3 games. And the way that FanDuel's salary algorithm works is they have a baseline salary that they start off with at the end of the year, and then as the season goes on, the more recent performance is the one that starts to dictate. So, you got to look for opportunities where a player is hot over the last 2 or 3 games and FanDuel's salary is not reflected yet, or a situation where a player's salary has just dropped because he's had a couple of bad games, and that's a situation with Howard. Howard's salary has just dropped, and now he's at 8,500. Add that up with the matchup, I think he has upside of 50 fantasy points tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's a guy who I would have wanted if I had the salary for him, but I chose to spend it on Kevin Love instead.
Well, you win with Roy Hibbert, and we can definitely, I
Yeah.
definitely want to give you props on Roy Hibbert. I mean, he's only at 6,100. Again, he's kind of a hit or miss kind of guy. Like, he can put up 20, he can put up 40, and that may not be the highest scoring game. But let's remember, you're taking advantage of a situation with Al Horford being out, and so there's a very weak interior there. And Hibbert's a kind of guy that can load up on blocks, especially against an inferior opponent. Hibbert could go out and get 4 or 5 blocks tonight, no problem. He can rack up 15 rebounds and get you 10 points, 15 points. So I like the Hibbert play.
Yeah, and the way I went about this, because Hibbert can do everything. I mean, he can pass, he can block, he can shoot. He has his hook shot going now, which is good, and he can definitely rebound. So he might not be flashy in any particular category other than blocks, but he's a guy that can get you points across the board as far as fantasy is concerned. And depending on if sites actually do turnovers or not, he's one of the lower turnover centers, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just another way to maximize the point output for the center position, which can be a little hit or miss depending on which guy you go with. So Hibbert to me seemed like the most stable of the guys at that price range, and actually had some upside for tonight as well, which is just an added icing on the cake.
Yeah, I mean, if your theory, I would say Hibbert is more of a tournament play, because if you have the theory that everyone's going to be on Dwight Howard tonight and you want to zig when everyone else is zagging, then Hibbert would be the guy you want to play in the tournament, because if Hibbert goes off and for some reason maybe they bench Howard or Howard doesn't have a good game for whatever reason, that's when you're going to stand in the money. So that's really when it comes to tournament strategy, where sometimes you want to what people call fade, which means you want to not play that guy. And that would be a situation where you could fade Dwight Howard and play Roy Hibbert, and maybe go with a guy like Harden or Anthony Davis, or like you did with Kevin Love, because those may be lesser owned players tonight. Everyone's going to be on Houston, so I think your lineup plays best in a tournament because you're fading some of those other players.
Yeah, but if we were playing head-to-head, I would actually favor yours, just because there's a lot more consistency and a lot more Houston. One big Houston guy that I do not have in Dwight Howard. So as you can see, guys, there's multiple ways to play this game. It's a lot of fun. Please, by all means, all of our stuff is free on the site, so rotowire.com/daily for all of this great analysis from Rathburn and many, many more. We actually may be seeing more of them in the future coming on the show. But for right now, Rath, was there anyone that you were debating between that you wanted to go with and just didn't make the list just because there weren't enough spots, or just someone you to be on the lookout for that's not in either one of our lineups?
Yeah, I talked earlier about Glenn Davis. That would be a guy that I would look at. I looked at Kyle. I basically had swapped Jeremy Lin and Anthony Davis, and I had Kyle Lowry and I had Glenn Davis. The way that I looked at it is the upside on Lin was just so huge, I had to play him. And then I was looking at Glenn Davis. I really like Glenn Davis tonight because, again, with the Vukovic being out, a lot of the offense would go through Davis, and so that would be the play there. And he's extremely cheap on FanDuel. Glenn Davis right now is sitting at only 5,800. So if you want a 5X, you're looking at 30 fantasy points. I think that's very doable with a guy like that. So the thing I would take a look at is, keep in line a guy like Jody Meeks was somebody that I looked at as shooting guard. He's been going off, and with the Lakers being so banged up, Jody Meeks is a guy that's been putting up 35, 40 fantasy points, and he's extremely cheap on FanDuel as well. So I'd say Jody Meeks is a guy you want to take a look at, and then Glenn Davis would be the other guy you want to take a look at.
Perfect. And that'll wrap it up for this segment of Daily Fantasy Basketball. For Mike Rathburn at fantasyrath, I'm Mike Gottlieb at SportsByGotti. Please, thank you for checking it out. And then also, please go to rotowire.com/daily for all of our free content. And if you want a free trial for all the in-depth basketball articles that we have free trials going on to the site at rotowire.com/Twitter. Thank you, guys. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.
Best of luck tonight, guys.